It's 2 o'clock. Nothing's happened. What the hell's happening? Director's take, opening up the conversation on 5v5 and 6v6. Holy moly. Okay. Let's see it. Hey everyone, there's been a lot of talk about 6v6 lately, and it's only intensified in recent weeks since we posted our latest director's take and made a Twitter post with a promise to talk about it in the future. Well, now is the future, and this is the next piece, so let's get right into it. Wait, let's not quite yet. This is a pretty complex and nuanced topic, and it gets to the beating heart of what makes this game tick. Our players have different opinions and preferences about the ideal number of players in an Overwatch match, and so does our team. We're a microcosm of the broader community and discuss this internally. I'm hoping this piece will serve as an introduction to our own discussions and a jumping off point to engage with all of you. Oh my. They're talking about 6v6. It's happening, guys. Okay. Let's continue. I'd also like to set a few expectations and ground rules. First, it's pretty long. Creators are going to lose their voices reading this one out loud. Yep. If you like a TLDR for what's next section should suffice. Okay, reading comprehension, sorry. Secondly, I'm not here to tell you what you ought to like, or even what's empirically better. This is a game and your preferences for fun is relative to your own tastes, abilities, and experiences. Lastly, there are years of decisions that affect such a fundamental piece of Overwatch. Some of you might be intimately aware of these, while others might not. Before diving in, I'd like to set the stage, give some context on some of the larger changes to the game and ultimately culminated in the 5v5 format we have today. So basically, they're saying that there's no, they're not going to say what the better format is, but they're going to give context for how we got here today. Historical context. There have been 3 large format changes to Overwatch, and the first happened shortly after the game launched. This was hero limits. Before this, there could be any number of particular heroes on one team. You could have 6 Genjis, 6 Reinhardts. If my memory serves me right, the winner of Teams 4 first internal tournament was 1 Winston, 5 Zenyatas. We called it Quinston. Zenyatta orb stacked with no cap to healing at the time. It was glorious and terrifying. Okay. During early development, it was necessary to have duplicate heroes per team. Our first core combat milestone only had 4 heroes. As the roster grew, this was no longer necessary, and it also introduced issues. Overwatch heroes have very distinct kits with impactful abilities. Stacking abilities could be fun, but it posed challenges to balancing many of those abilities in-game. People reference double barrier, but back then you could have 6. Imagine cycling 6 immortality fields. Yeah, it sounds terrible. I don't want to imagine 6 immortality fields. I already hate 1. The number of team compositions and strategies available was huge. The variety was great, but we feel like we could never... Wait, sorry. The variety was great, but we didn't feel like we could ever truly balance the game without severely watering down our heroes. So we made the choice to impose a limit of 1 hero per each team. Or wait, 1 of each hero per team. This essentially solved the issues of ability stacking, but it did have a few side effects. It traded some of the creativity in putting together team compositions for a more consistent and balanced experience. It also took away some of the choice from players. If someone wanted to play Tracer, but you are already Tracer, they would be unable to. A theme of this and future decisions was limiting match variety as well as player freedom and creativity in order to create a more balanced, consistent, and competitive experience for players. Remember this point because we'll touch on it a few more times in this piece. I think the hero limit rule was a great decision, and we would make it again. The other 2 large format changes have a lot of positive benefits, but are not as clear cut. So this was the swap from no limits to hero limits, which I think was great because that version of the game was like, I mean, as he said, it was pretty ridiculous and hard to balance, right? Like, I think at one point, one of the meta strats was like 4 Winstons, 2 Lucios on Hanamura, point A. So you could do some crazy stuff. But yeah, it also just made for some cringe-ass comps. So I've never heard anybody say that, damn, I really miss hero limits. I feel like it made the game more competitive. I've never heard that. So fair game on removing that one, to be honest. The second large change to the game's format was the move from open queue to role queue, which limited team compositions to 2 heroes from each role. Before role queue, there was no enforced 2-2-2 team composition, and players had the freedom to select any role they liked once they load into a match. With open queue, teams had a lot more freedom of choice, about what heroes and team compositions to play. But there was quite a few problems that role queue intended to address. Prior to the implementation of role queue, there was a stark imbalance in the number of people playing each role within each match. Damage was by far, and still is today, the most popular role, and tank was by far the least popular. In fact, seeing matches with 5 or even 6 DPS players on each team was not uncommon. Let me digest that. This was a bigger problem in like quick play, right? Like it was pretty often in quick play you'd have some wonky ass comp in open queue with hella DPS or no healers. Nobody would want to play healer, or like you just wouldn't have a tank. But I think in comp, at least in the higher ranks, people were a little bit more willing to flex, just a bit more. And especially since I was a tank player back then, usually all I needed was a support, but you know, you get like one support. So being a team without a support puts you at a massive disadvantage. Or being a team with one support versus a team that's running like 2 supports, again, is still a pretty big disadvantage. So yeah, that was not too fun. This role imbalance frequently led to wildly imbalanced matches between teams. Yep. The game played better when heroes from all 3 roles were selected. The disparity caused social issues as players would try to pressure other players into playing tank or support roles, even if they didn't want to. It made balancing heroes more difficult since we couldn't balance around a certain role ratio for each team, and it even made introducing new heroes more difficult. Since any new hero kit had to take in consideration the hundreds of different team compositions and abilities that could overlap with it, the move to a role queue format was aimed to mitigate these challenges. Caused social issues as players would try to pressure other players into playing tanks or supports. I feel like this is like a thing that still happens today, and I don't think they can really solve that, you know? It's true, people would be like, oh, we need a support, play support. You picked last, you gotta play support, you gotta play tank or whatever, or you're doing shit, you gotta swap. But this is gonna happen like no matter what. Like even now, if you're playing a tank and you're not winning every single fight, it's a tank's problem, you gotta swap tanks. Like, oh, we need a shield, or oh, we don't need a ball here, we don't need amalgate. It's gonna happen no matter what. So that's not something that they can like fix, to be honest. And no, it's always the worst player. I was saying this the other day. It's always the worst players that are the ones that complain. Moving to role queue solved many of these problems and added some additional benefits to the game as well. With role queue in place, matchmaking is based on skill within a given role and not just skill overall. Some players have wildly different skill ratings per role, so the ability to matchmake around set roles provides a big measurable boost in match quality. Role queue also solidified the identity of each role, and the fantasy of doing that role's job became clearer. Because you queue open queue, maybe you got to your rank as like a Mercy one trick, right? For example. And then all of a sudden now you want to play like Widowmaker or some shit. You got that Mercy one trick playing Widow in your game. It like completely makes the game unbalanced. That's an extreme example. Usually it's something more like subtle, like, I don't know, a Lucio player deciding they want to play Ana, or even a tank player being like a Rhine main, being like, okay, and now I'm going to play Zarya, without really being as good at that role or that hero. However, the switch to the role queue system did have some downsides, the largest of which was longer queue times. Prior to role queue, the matchmaker just needed to find 12 players of a similar skill level in order to put matches together. After role queue, it needed to find 4 players of each role to make a match. The total number of players queuing has no effect on this. It's almost solely governed by the ratio of players queuing for the least popular role. Given the game's low relative ratio of players queuing for tank than other damage and support roles, queue times went way up. We'll go into details on this later. Okay. The team tried to address this imbalance in various ways. We introduced a priority pass system that gave players who played low demand roles tank a shorter queue time when they switched to damage. This had a positive effect for several weeks, but its influence quickly faded. We introduced systems to reward players for playing tank, eventually giving them loot boxes and a bunch of XP for queuing that role. None of these were able to put a dent into the demand for playing DPS. Damage queue times drifted a bit lower over time, but much of this was due to the introduction of open queue competitive and the permanent loss of damage players unwilling to wait for a long match. Okay. There were additional drawbacks with role queue. I mentioned earlier that many of our decisions made improvements to the game at the cost of match variety and player freedom. Team compositions were now locked at 2-2-2. This was another step to a more consistent experience within Overwatch. but sometimes consistency can start to feel samey. That's another way of saying stale. There were some pretty exciting metas in the pre-role queue world, and swapping to a hero of a different role mid-match was often a much bigger change and more exciting than swapping to one of the same role. Like hero limits, role queue took away a part of the freedom in selecting heroes that served as a base of Overwatch, but I often wonder if the success of it is as cut and dry as that of hero limits. Could there be an in-between version that softens the original problems without completely solving them, and also isn't quite as restrictive as our current role queue system? A bit more on that later. I mean, personally, I think that open queue is the best format of Overwatch when all the puzzle pieces fit. And that's the problem. All the puzzle pieces don't fit unless you're in a pre-made team. And what I mean by that is that, like, the matchmaker queues you up with players of a similar skill level, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean they're all playing the right thing. Like, you might not have a tank, you might not have a support, as mentioned earlier, or maybe you just have people that play like the same thing. Like, you have two supports, but they're both Mercy players. Sorry, the Mercy players are catching a lot of strays today, but it's kind of a good example. So yeah, that's the problem with the open queue format. Like, you can get screwed by the RNG of the matchmaker a lot more than you can in role queue. Like, having no support is just such a massive disadvantage versus a team that has supports. Like, even if you're all the better players, the fact that you have no healing puts you at an insane disadvantage. So that's the problem with open queue. I kind of think it was necessary. Like, the greater good of the game, the average of the game quality went up by a lot in giving up open queue. But I think it was the best format of Overwatch. Like, I think in team play or in a pre-made stack, open queue is insane and really fun. The third major format change, holy moly, the third great war, chat. The third great war. These changes, as well as longer queue times, led us to the third and most recent major format change to the game, the shift from 6v6 to 5v5. This is almost a blog within a vlog, but we're going to cover three things: why we switched to 5v5, queue times after the switch to 5v5, and what the team thinks of 6v6. Oh boy, here we go. There were many reasons behind the transition to 5v5. When we launched Overwatch 2, we talked about the greater individual agency that players could have in 5v5. Yo, Dodger, with the 68 months. Thank you for the 68 months, man. Appreciate you.
They saved out.
Continuing. Overwatch is a team sport, and it requires players to rely on each other to be successful. This was even more the case previously, and the game could be frustrating if your team was out of sync. Many times, fights in 6v6 couldn't resolve until ultimate abilities came online. Correct that until ultimate combos could be executed to break through these two tanks worth of mitigation supported by high uncontested healing output. The world of 6v6 could have really high highs but really low lows. One of the design goals of 5v5 was to try and raise that floor, even though it was at the expense of some of the high moments. I think what he's trying to say is that it's difficult on an individual level to make a breakthrough in 6v6. It was more team dependent and team orientated. So continuing, Overwatch 2 also has a greater emphasis on FPS gameplay. There's less damage mitigation in CC, and players get to shoot at enemies more. Crowd control could take players out of the game for an extended period of time, especially when they were chained back to back. A 5-second Sombra hack, May Freeze on her primary, Brig Bash, Honor Sleep, Orisa Halt, Sigma Rock could all happen consecutively to one player. Yep. Typically, a tank player who could often survive this onslaught, at least in game. Their real life mental health was another story. Yep. Damage heroes often complain that their role was the least impactful relative to the strength of super powerful tank synergies and support heroes undoing their playmaking. The emphasis on ability cooldown management, ult tracking, shooting barriers instead of players, and not enough timing windows to just shoot enemies and get eliminations were all factors that contributed to this feeling. Yeah, they definitely did. It was a complaint, and it was a valid complaint. There wasn't that much of the FPS aspect because it was more of the MOBA game. For sure, that's true. Support heroes also had to focus almost exclusively on healing since there were bigger team health pools and more incoming damage on the field with the additional tank player. In 5v5, they have more agency to add some damage or duel other heroes. This is also really true. I've been saying that, like, support and DPS in Overwatch 2 is better. In 5v5, it's better. But a part of that I start to question is, like, what if, like, we had all the tools we had now in 6v6? Like, I wonder now if it could still be better. Like, map reworks, you got the DPS passive, the support passive. They kind of, like, change supports in a way so that they're a little bit more damage orientated. And there's more tools now, right? There's more tools to solve the problems we had before. And what I mean by that is, like, we have more heroes with different abilities. Just for example, I think of, like, Hanamura first point. Trying to break that choke was, like, it felt fucking impossible on most heroes. But now, like, you got the new version of Sombra, who's a little bit more effective at, like, putting pressure on the back line. You got Juno, who's coming up, who can just, like, fly and hover through the choke. You got different tanks now who can break the choke differently. Yeah, I really do wonder if, like, it would be easier now to play 6v6. Like, on an individual level, if you'd be able to do more. I mean, obviously, they'd have to, like, nerf tanks from what they are right now. Anyways, continuing. Tank synergy wasn't always fun. It slowed the game down and stabilized it, but sometimes it absolutely grounded it to a halt. People point to double shield meta as an example of this. It wasn't just about double shield, though. The ability to stack very defensive heavy lineup, especially in game modes that required teams to push through a small choke, caused a lot of matches to feel like there was no progress at all. The game is faster now, and it doesn't typically stall out. It feels like there's more room to move around the map without the need to earn every inch of it. In 5v5, fights are often less focused on moving around in a death ball formation, and there's more room to take angles, flank, duel other players, which brings in more of the FPS gameplay. Very true. While 6v6 can have high moments, it's also hard to follow. Tracking 9 other players is easier than 11. There are fewer visual effects on screen, especially during big team fights. Overwatch is a pretty demanding game, and moving to 5v5 made it a bit more cognitively manageable. Yeah, so they made Overwatch more new player friendly, and that's just a fact. 5v5 is more new player friendly. There's less to look at. I always bring the example of, like, you're a new player to the game. Imagine trying to deal with Ball and Hog versus just trying to deal with Hog, you know? All right, queue time data and context. The chart below shows ranked... Hold up. Wait, let me scroll down a little bit. The chart below shows ranked play queue times per role after the introduction of role queue to Overwatch in 2019, compared to queue times per role in Overwatch 2's 5v5 role queue format. As you can see, the shift from 5v5 role queue dramatically reduced queue times for players in all roles, and most notably the damage role, which is the most popular. Okay, let me see if I can get a zoom in on this. Hold up. So basically, the first bar is the DPS queue times after role queue, which is 7 minutes. Almost 7, more than 7.5 minutes. Then the second bar is Overwatch 2 5v5 lifetime throughout. So that's the average. Oh, that's the DPS average. So the DPS queue times went from 7.5 minutes to 3 minutes. Halved. And then the support queue time, it kind of looks like everything just halved pretty much. Except for tank. Tank didn't change that much, but it changed a little bit. So, yeah, it definitely does. That is a difference in queue times. Is this counting... It says post-roll queue. Is this counting everything after roll queue, even the drought season? Because the drought season, the queue times would go up, wouldn't they? Because less players playing? Question mark? Anyways, continuing. The biggest factor driving the difference between Overwatch and Overwatch 2's queue times is the ratio of players queuing for each role. We hear players speculate that long queue times are a result of not having enough players in Overwatch. That isn't the case. But instead that relative to the other roles, players generally queue tank less, leading to longer wait times for all, while we wait for a tank to free up to find a proper match. Okay, so never mind. The last thing I said doesn't even matter then. Because what it is it's the ratio of per role. So if there's less tanks, there's going to be less matches because of it. So in practice, the actual ratio of players queuing for tank, damage, and support is much closer to the current format 1-2-2 format than the previous 2-2-2 format. As a result, the 5v5 role queue format better mirrors actual player interest in each role, and making the switch resulted in shorter queues. The sharp drop-off in queue times in October 2022 is when Overwatch 2 along with 5v5 shipped. The queue times are of all heroes dropped and are now much shorter than they were in the 6v6 world. This is almost all because the game requires one less tank in a match. If you look at the current queue times, you can see that there's still a lack of tanks compared to our other roles. Just flipping the switch and returning the 6v6 would likely cause a return to the previous queue times, or worse. Flipping the switch, I've actually said that one a couple times. Regardless of the amount of players in games, queue times are always reflective of how many players are queued per role. In other words, the main driver of increased queue times is the ratio of players queued in each role. Since there are less players queuing tank, queues would likely go back to the way they were before. So this is why I've always been like slightly in favor of 5v5 because of this queue times. And they basically say here, there's just not enough tank players. So with having one less tank player, the demand to make a lobby is less. Because like he said, the ratio. So yeah, that's a pretty valid reason for why they haven't immediately gone back to 6v6. But let's see what they say. Thoughts on 6v6. The game started its life with 6 players on each team. I discussed why we moved away from 6v6, but that doesn't mean it's without any merit. There were moments in madness that could happen with 12 players in a match that just don't quite coalescence? When there are 10. It was almost too much to keep track of. Correction, it was too much to keep track of at times, but that was part of the charm. There are big moments in Overwatch 2, but they don't quite have the same chaotic over-the-top feeling to them. Part of the chaos allowed players to feel less pressure in a match. That is very true. That is so true. There was an extra player to take up a bit of slack for someone that was performing poorly, and since that player was a tank, they had quite a bit of impact. There were a lot more hit points and defensive capabilities to burn through, which had stabilizing effects on gameplay. Teams would fold a bit slower than they do now. We went over some issues of tank synergy earlier, but having 2 of them allowed one to focus on protecting their backline, while the other held ground or pushed into the enemy team. The tank role had a lot of depth in understanding how to work with the other tank on the team. This part of the mastery curve took a long time, and for a small group of people devoted to it, that was part of the allure. We mentioned the difficulty in balancing tanks for 6v6 earlier, but the past year and a half has shown us that there are issues with balancing tanks for 5v5. For much of Overwatch 2, tanks have been fairly balanced, but when one of them becomes a powerful outlier like Mauga is a fucking mistake. That could be felt strongly in the world of one tank. They thought balancing tanks in 5v5 would be easier. And I kind of thought so too. Because it just makes sense. When you lower the number of variables and possibilities, it should be easier. But I think the problem is, 5v5 would be easier to balance if they started from scratch. They're changing existing things.
Even after all that, I think 6v6 is still the better choice. Tank fucking sucks now.
Classic 6v6er. Yeah, tank definitely is not as good. It's not even a question. I think tank was better in 6v6. What's next? Okay, that was a lot of setup. I think I put more effort into this essay than I wrote in college. So where do we go from here? At the end of the day, we want to make a game that players want to play. Because of the challenges mentioned previously, we are focused on making 5v5 the best experience that it could be. However, because we operate as a service to our players, we always remain open-minded to reevaluating our decisions based on your actions and feedback. Wait, I just realized I had Overwatch running in the background. Oh my god, now I feel weird not hearing the background noise. Okay. To give you the best game experience we can. Rather than introduce a disruptive permanent change to the game, we prefer to explore the space further and make changes based on that exploration. With that said, we're looking at running a series of events to try out different core team composition formats in Overwatch 2. The community has just once or twice suggested a test. Yeah, the arcade mode. Why not put various forms of 6v6 in the game in order to gauge the results? We agree. And based on your feedback, we're exploring how we can test different forms of 6v6 in the game to gauge the results. This has taken some time, however, for the reasons that may not be readily apparent. The first and honestly largest reason is the need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. I'm referring to the frame rate and memory constraints. With 12 players in a match, Okay, sorry. Said that with a weird tone. There have been quite a few upgrades and additions to Overwatch 2 that have an impact on the performance of the game. These range from new features like allied outlines and enabling healer vision by default, the addition of more technically demanding hero kits, as well as visual upgrades to the UI, heroes, and maps. In a 6v6 setting, these upgrades can have significant impact on our players, causing the game to underperform on older systems. Overwatch is a fast-paced game, and maintaining the game that runs smoothly across all platforms is important for the player's experience. When a limited time task could arrive sooner, the team is still investigating exactly how long it would take to permanently increase the performance across the game. This would be a large effort that most likely takes at least several seasons to accomplish. Jesus, several seasons. There are several seasons. Jesus. Another issue, and one that still gives me anxiety about opening this Pandora's box, is what to do with queue times if enough players prefer 6v6 to keep some form of it around. The team was not able to solve this issue previously. While we have some ideas now, there's no guarantee that they will work. Is there a world where people are willing to live with long queue times to play this format? Maybe, but that's a pretty risky move to make. We also have tens of millions of new players that have only played 5v5. We want to be openly mindful not to frustrate those players who like the game as it is today. This is it. These are the strongest reasons against 6v6. Hey, they're going to try it anyways, and I think that's cool that they're going to do that. The outcome of these tests would give us a lot of valuable information to consider moving forward. We'd run the test for a few weeks and gauge interest from the community. Then we'd measure the impact it had on other experiences in Overwatch 2, like 5v5 arcade, etc. We take the lessons from this playtest to see what we can learn about the mode within the current game ecosystem and the future of Overwatch. We will reflect carefully on the learnings from whatever tests we run and explore how to best give players what's being asked for. Whether that's a world of 5v5, 6v6, or even both is for the future to figure out. Chances are it's going to be one or the other. Because the problem is we have role queue. I mean, we'd have 6v6, we have open queue, we have 6v6 ranked, we have open queue ranked, I believe we still have that. So that's already 4 playlists splitting the player base. And then they'd have to throw in 6v6 ranked and 6v6. Sorry, I don't know if I mixed up the 6v6 and 5v5, but you get the point. There'd be like 6 major different game modes, which is pretty splitting. Which is why I say it would probably have to be one or the other. I'm going to jump on a soapbox for a moment. When you look at the changes to Overwatch since inception, it's clear that many of those have reduced some of the variety within an Overwatch match. We get feedback from some players that Overwatch can feel the same from game to game. While much of this gets attributed to 5v5, we feel there is still more at play here. Besides running experiments with 6v6, we like to run some that re-examine the ways we tried solving previous problems, specifically with the goal of bringing some of the freedom back to an Overwatch match without the severity of the issues that accompanied it. For instance, we think there could be other ways of putting the team together that aren't quite as rigid as a set composition, but not as loose as open queue. We'll be running at least one quick play hack based on this idea in Season 13. What season are we? Are we in 11? There's some gotchas to this direction, but after reading 400 pages of this blog, I hope you're all able to see that there are trade-offs to many of these decisions that go into this game, and into any game, really. We're in 11? Okay, so 2 seasons. To wrap it up for now, your feedback has driven both our inspiration and commitment to testing new ideas in game. We want to be super thoughtful about how we implement new ideas into the live game because there are millions of players who jump into Overwatch each season, and we want anything we put in game to benefit the whole community. Ultimately, Overwatch team wants to continue building the game that you want to play seasons after seasons. This blog, or thesis rather, is just the start of a conversation. This is the last time we're going to be getting into 5v5 or 6v6, and we can't wait to share more about our plans in the future. In closing, we appreciate you so much. We love seeing your passion and dedication for the game, Team 4, and the Overwatch community. The team hears you, we see you, and we're incredibly thankful to be on this ride with all of you. Can't wait to share more in the upcoming months. And let's make a great game together. Oh, what a sweet little ending. So, chat, what do you guys think? W blog post or what? I think this is a pretty solid win-win for everyone. I think it's a good blog. Good blog, good direction. So here's something that got me thinking. Something that got the cog wheels rolling, right? So they mentioned they want to try a format not as rigid as role queue and back to 6v6-ish, right? So if the problem is that we don't have enough tank players, we keep 2 supports, we keep 2 DPS, 1 tank still, but hear me out. Here's the 6 player. Here's the 6 player. The flex role. The flex role. Okay? And the flex role, you queue for flex. And when I say queue for flex, I don't mean you queue every role. You queue the flex role. And the flex role basically lets you pick tank, DPS, or support in a game. Bam. And there you go. I think that would solve the problem of not having enough tank players, because there are people that will queue the flex role. Someone said they should go back to open queue, but I don't think open queue's the play. Why getting rid of open queue was the greater good is because it made the game less matchmaker RNG, right? There's still an aspect of like you queue into a game and it's GG go next because you just don't have the right players or the right mindset. But open queue was definitely like you could just get unlucky a lot more with bad hero pulls, like a lot more. I had a game before where I queued into Numbani, and we had 4 Mercy 1 tricks. We had 4 Mercy 1 tricks in ranked GM, open queue, Overwatch 1. At the beginning of Overwatch 2, most people were saying this is better. This game's better. The only thing is, except for support players were complaining because the role stopped being chill. It wasn't a chill role anymore. That's one thing for sure. Because he said in the blog post that you could just like pocket heal. You could just heal the whole time. So it was so fucking chill. And now it's not as chill. Now you have to like, you know, take duels and shit a lot more. And then supports got buffed. Then they had no reason to complain anymore. DPS in Overwatch 2, it's better than it was in 1. You can take duels more. The only role that I truly believe got was the tank role. The tank role absolutely got. DPS and support, they fucking won with Overwatch 2. The tank role got. And I don't get why all these people that don't play tank are pretending like the game has gotten worse for them, because it really hasn't. Oh, the 1 tank is the raid boss killing me. Bro, before it was 2 tanks. And you could do less about it. Either your hero is not as fun as they used to be, or like the game's changed in a different direction that you don't like. It's just like, oh, but 6v6, I remember how great 6v6 was. I think an example is like Junkrat players don't complain that often. At least I haven't noticed that they complained. But if I was somebody that mained Junkrat in Overwatch 1 and is now playing Junkrat in his current state, I would be very mad. Because he fucking sucks compared to what he did in Overwatch 1. But is that to say that all the Junkrats have the same, I mean, all the DPS heroes have the same experience as that Junkrat? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Some heroes are better and more, what's the word? Engaging now in Overwatch 2. I'm excited to see where this goes, man. This is big news for Overwatch. Now they just got to get Overwatch 2 and remove the 2. Remove the 2. And there we go. We're back. We're so back, guys. We're so back. Just make it Overwatch. Make it Overwatch again.